Bullies attack. Black girl into coma. Then her mother takes action and shakes the entire school. The morning began like any other for Amara. She walked down the narrow hallway of her high school, her books clutched tightly against her chest, her eyes lowered as if she was trying to disappear into the floor. She had learned long ago that eye contact could invite trouble. At 17 years old, Amara had grown used to the weight of whispers that followed her wherever she went. But what she faced each day was more than casual teasing. It was cruel, targeted, and relentless. Amara's classmates often wore their bright orange hoodies with the school's bold letter B across the chest. To her, the sight of those hoodies was not school pride, it was a warning. Many of the students who bullied her were athletes, boys who were adored for their talent on the field and girls who carried their popularity like a shield. They moved in groups, always together, as if strength came not from kindness but from numbers. That morning, Amara's locker jammed. She tugged at the metal handle, frustrated, her fingers aching from the effort. Behind her, she could already hear laughter. "Look at her," one voice said. "Can't even open a locker right." "Pathetic," another added. The sound of sneakers shuffled closer. She kept her head down, refusing to react, but her silence seemed to provoke them more than words ever could. One boy leaned against the locker, smirking, while another whispered something cruel that made the group erupt in laughter. Amara swallowed hard and focused on her breathing. She thought about her mother, Naomi, who always told her, "Do not let their words define you. You are stronger than they know." Naomi worked 2 jobs to make sure Amara never felt like she was less than anyone else. At night, Amara often studied by the dim kitchen light while her mother folded uniforms from the diner where she worked. Naomi would look at her daughter's tired face and remind her, "One day this will all be worth it. Keep going, baby." But in that hallway, with laughter bouncing off the walls, it was hard for Amara to believe those words. When the bell rang, she thought she was safe. The crowd began to thin, students moving into classrooms. She exhaled in relief, adjusting her backpack straps. But then came the shove. It was sudden, forceful, sending her stumbling into the lockers. Her books crashed to the floor, papers scattering like fallen leaves. "Oops," one boy said mockingly. "Did I do that?" The others laughed. Amara knelt quickly, gathering her papers with trembling hands. Her heart raced, her face burned with humiliation. She wanted to cry, but she refused to let them see her tears. One girl snatched a notebook from the ground and flipped through it. "What's this?" "Oh, look, she's got drawings." "What are you, 5? "Give it back," Amara said softly. "What was that?" The girl mocked. "Speak up. Or are you too scared?" The boy who had shoved her stepped forward. His voice was louder, harsher. "Say please." Something inside Amara tightened. She reached out to grab the notebook, and in that moment the boy shoved her shoulder again. Harder this time. She hit the floor, her backpack sliding off. Students passing by slowed down. Some stared, others looked away, uncomfortable. A few raised their phones. Amara could hear the faint clicks of cameras capturing her humiliation. She tried to stand, but the boy blocked her path. His face twisted with anger she did not understand. Why did he hate her so much? Why did he need to prove something by hurting her? He grabbed her notebook and threw it across the hallway. "Go get it," he sneered. Amara took a shaky breath, rose to her feet, and walked toward her notebook. Her knees wobbled, but she refused to collapse again. She bent down to pick it up, and as she did, another voice shouted behind her, "Do it!" Suddenly a loud commotion erupted. When Amara turned, the boy was running toward her with a baseball bat in his hands. For a split second, time froze. She saw the fury in his eyes, the way his grip tightened on the bat, and the crowd that gathered, half horrified and half thrilled by the spectacle. She did not even have time to scream before the bat was raised high above her. A teacher's voice echoed down the hall, but it was too late. The bat came down, striking her shoulder and sending her crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and overwhelming. She gasped, her breath stolen from her lungs. The hallway went silent. Students who had been cheering moments earlier now looked frozen in disbelief. Some backed away while others continued to record, their phones steady even as their hands shook. Amara's head hit the floor. The world blurred, her vision dimming. She could hear voices, distant, distorted, as if underwater. "Get up," someone shouted. "Is she okay?" another voice asked, but it was drowned out by nervous laughter. She tried to move, but her body refused. Her eyes fluttered shut. Darkness pulled her in like a tide. When teachers finally reached her, panic spread. An ambulance was called. Sirens wailed, and paramedics rushed her onto a stretcher. As she was wheeled away, the school's bright hallway lights faded from her sight. The last thing Amara thought of was her mother's voice, soft, steady, full of love. Do not let their words define you. You are stronger than they know. But in that moment, lying unconscious, Amara's strength had been stolen from her. The students left behind whispered in shock. Some deleted their videos. Others replayed them, unsure if they should laugh or cry. The boy with the bat was dragged to the principal's office, shouting protests that it was just a joke. Yet for Amara, there was nothing funny about what had happened. She was caught between life and death, between hope and despair. And miles away, her mother Naomi was about to receive the phone call that would change everything. Naomi had just finished her second shift at the diner when the call came. The air outside was cool and heavy with the smell of fried food still clinging to her uniform. She was tired, the kind of tired that sat deep in her bones, but she pushed herself forward because that was what she had always done. For years it had been her and her daughter against the world. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she answered, she could hear panic in the voice on the other end. It was the school office, but they were speaking in fragments, words tumbling over one another. Ambulance, hospital, critical, unconscious. Naomi's body went cold. For a moment she could not breathe. She did not even ask questions. She simply dropped everything, grabbed her keys, and drove with shaking hands. The red and blue lights of the ambulance glowed in the distance as she pulled up to the hospital. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give out before she reached the door. Inside the emergency room, the smell of antiseptic and the beeping of machines surrounded her. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, their faces focused, their voices clipped and serious. Naomi saw her daughter for the first time on the hospital bed. Amara looked small, too small for 17, her face pale, her body connected to tubes and wires. Naomi's legs almost gave way beneath her. She rushed to her daughter's side, gripping her hand as if sheer force of will could wake her. "Mama's here," she whispered through tears. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." But she knew deep down that her daughter was anything but safe. She demanded answers, but the doctors could only say that Amara was in a coma, her body trying to heal from the trauma. They spoke in medical terms that blurred together. Phrases about swelling and monitoring, about time being the only answer. Naomi barely heard them. All she could see was her daughter lying still, the spark in her eyes gone, the life in her voice silenced. That night, Naomi sat by the hospital bed, her head resting against the mattress. Memories filled her mind. Amara as a little girl, clutching her backpack on her first day of school. Her smile when she brought home her first A in science. Her dreams of becoming a doctor so she could help people. All those dreams now hung in the balance because of cruelty and negligence. The pain inside Naomi was like nothing she had ever known. But beneath the grief, another feeling began to grow. It was anger, not the kind that burned out quickly, but the kind that smoldered steady and determined. She remembered the countless times Amara had come home in tears, talking about the whispers, the shoves in the hallway, the cruel jokes. Naomi had gone to the school before, and each time they had brushed her off. "Kids can be mean," they said. "She just needs to ignore it, ignore it." Those words now rang in Naomi's ears like a cruel echo. Ignore it, until her child lay in a hospital bed fighting for her life. As the hours turned into days, Naomi refused to leave her daughter's side. She spoke to her as if she could hear, reading her favorite books aloud, playing her favorite gospel songs on her phone. She told her stories about the life waiting for her when she woke up, about the college she would attend, about the future she would not let anyone take away. Nurses passing by often stopped and listened, some with tears in their eyes because they could hear the raw love in Naomi's voice. But outside those hospital walls, whispers began to spread. The school wanted to control the narrative. They called it an accident, a fight that had gotten out of hand. Some parents defended their children, saying Amara must have provoked it somehow. The Bullies' families hired lawyers determined to protect their reputations. Naomi heard every word, and each one cut her deeper. How could they look at her daughter lying in that bed and call it an accident? How could they pretend this was just another teenage scuffle? She knew then that she had a choice. She could cry silently, let the system cover it up, let her daughter become another forgotten name. Or she could rise, even with trembling legs and a broken heart, and demand justice not only for Amara, but for every child who had ever been silenced. One evening, as Naomi sat by the hospital bed, she took her daughter's hand and spoke aloud as if making a promise. "Baby, I will not let them bury your voice. You are still here, and as long as I breathe, I will fight for you. They will know your name, and they will never forget what they did." Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were fierce. In that moment, Naomi was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a force aflame, and nothing would put her out. The next morning, she began to take the first steps. She called friends, neighbors, anyone who would listen. She told them what had happened, not in whispers, but in truth. She gathered witnesses, reaching out to students who had seen everything. Some were afraid, but others, emboldened by Naomi's courage, began to share what they knew. There were videos, shaky but clear enough to prove what happened. Naomi was not a lawyer or an activist, but she had something stronger: the unbreakable will of a mother who refused to give up. As she sat once again by her daughter's side that night, she whispered, "They thought they could silence you, but all they did was wake me up. And when I rise, the whole world will hear." Naomi kissed Amara's forehead, her tears falling softly onto her daughter's skin. For the first time since the attack, she felt a flicker of hope. Pain had brought her to her knees, but love was pushing her to her feet. And that was the beginning of a storm no one at that school could have imagined. The days following the attack felt like a blur for Naomi. She lived between the hard plastic chair, beside her daughter's hospital bed, and the echo of unanswered questions. Nurses came and went, doctors spoke in measured tones. But the school, the very place that had promised to protect Amara, remained disturbingly quiet. At first, Naomi waited, believing the school would call, that administrators would apologize, that someone in authority would stand by her side and acknowledge what had happened. But no phone call came. No one from the school arrived at the hospital. Instead, silence filled the air, the kind of silence that was not an accident but a choice. Word spread in the community faster than Naomi could comprehend. Whispers reached her ears even in the waiting room, where strangers leaned in to discuss the story. Some spoke with sympathy, horrified by what they had heard. Others dismissed it as kids going too far. There were even those who twisted the narrative, suggesting Amara had done something to provoke the attack. Naomi clenched her fists when she heard those lies. How could anyone believe that a gentle girl, whose greatest joy was reading books and studying medicine, could have deserved this cruelty? One afternoon, Naomi returned home briefly to change clothes. Exhaustion weighed her down, but she forced herself into the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. As she waited, her phone buzzed with messages. She scrolled through them, her chest tightening. A video was circulating online. Someone had recorded the attack. The shaky footage showed her daughter's face, her fear, her collapse. It was being shared and commented on as though it were entertainment. Naomi dropped her phone onto the counter, her hands trembling. Tears blurred her vision, but behind the tears was a growing fury. The school could not pretend this was nothing when the world was already watching. The next morning, Naomi decided to go to the school. She walked into the front office, her presence commanding attention, though her clothes were simple and her face lined with sleepless nights. The secretary looked startled as Naomi demanded to see the principal. After a long wait, she was led into an office where 3 administrators sat with stiff expressions. The principal, a man with silver hair and a suit too polished for the situation, folded his hands on the desk. "Mrs. Williams," he began cautiously, "we are very sorry about what happened to your daughter. It was an unfortunate incident, and we are doing everything in our power to make sure it does not happen again." Naomi's voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Unfortunate incident? My daughter is in a coma because of what happened in your school. She is lying in a hospital bed and you call it unfortunate?" One of the other administrators, a woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, leaned forward. "We understand your pain, but teenagers can be impulsive. Sometimes things escalate. We cannot hold the entire school responsible for the actions of a few students." Naomi stared at them, hardly believing the words she was hearing. "Do you hear yourselves? You knew those boys were bullying my daughter. She complained and you brushed her off. You did nothing until they nearly killed her. And now you want to call it an accident?" The principal shifted uncomfortably. "We cannot discuss disciplinary actions due to privacy laws. Rest assured, we are handling the matter internally." Internally. The word echoed in Naomi's head like a door slamming shut. She knew what that meant. Silence, cover-ups, protecting the school's reputation at the expense of the truth. Naomi stood. You will not bury this. Not this time. My daughter is not a mistake you can sweep under a rug. If you will not speak, I will. She walked out of the office, her heart pounding, her mind racing. For the first time in her life, she felt the full weight of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. She was just one woman, a single mother working long hours, but she knew that staying silent would only invite more silence. Back at the hospital, she sat by Amara's side and spoke to her as if she could hear. They are trying to erase what happened to you, baby. But I will not let them. I promise you I will not stop until the world knows the truth. They will not silence us. In the days that followed, Naomi began to notice the shift among other students. Some of Amara's classmates came to visit the hospital quietly, guilt heavy in their eyes. A boy named Marcus confessed in a low voice. I wanted to help her that day, but I was scared. Everyone else was laughing. I thought if I said something, they'd turn on me too. Naomi took his hand. It's not too late to do the right thing.
Speak up now.
Tell the truth. But fear still held many back. Students whispered to her in private but refused to stand publicly. Parents, too, were afraid of the backlash. The families of the bullies were powerful in the town. They owned businesses, donated to the school, and had influence that stretched far beyond the classroom. Naomi understood then the enormity of what she was facing. It was not just about the boys who had hurt Amara. It was about a culture that excused cruelty, that protected the strong and silenced the vulnerable. Each night, as she looked at her daughter's still face, Naomi's resolve deepened. Silence was their weapon, but her voice would be her shield. She began to write everything down. The meetings, the names, the dismissals. She kept every message, every video, every witness account. She was building not just a case for her daughter, but a wall of truth too strong to be denied. Meanwhile, the school board issued a short statement to the media. They called the incident a regrettable altercation and assured parents that appropriate steps were being taken. Reading those words, Naomi felt her blood boil. Altercation? As if her daughter had been part of some equal fight. As if Amara had not been the one who suffered alone on that hallway floor. She knew then that the road ahead would be long and difficult. She would face denial, resistance, and even threats. But Naomi also knew she had no choice. To stay silent would be to betray her daughter. One night she sat by Amara's bed, the machines humming steadily in the background. She took her daughter's hand, squeezing gently, and whispered, "They think this is the end of your story, but it's not. This is only the beginning. You will wake up, and when you do, you'll see that your mama never stopped fighting for you." Naomi kissed her daughter's hand and closed her eyes, her body weary but her spirit unshaken. In that moment, she realized that silence was not just the enemy. It was the very thing she had to destroy. And so, while the school hid behind denial, Naomi began to prepare for war, not with violence, but with truth, courage, and the unbreakable love of a mother who refused to let her child's voice be stolen. Naomi had always thought of herself as an ordinary woman. She was not rich, not powerful, not someone with a title or a voice that people listened to. She was simply a mother who worked long hours, paid her bills late sometimes, and tried to raise her daughter with dignity. But as she sat in the hospital day after day, watching Amara's chest rise and fall with the help of machines, she realized that her life had changed. She was no longer just Amara's mother. She was now the voice Amara did not have. And if she stayed quiet, her daughter's suffering would be forgotten. It started small. She took out her old notebook, the one she used to keep grocery lists and bills, and began writing everything down. Every conversation with doctors, every word the school had said, every message she had received from students or parents. She filled pages with dates, times, names, and details. It was her way of holding on to the truth, because she knew the truth was the only weapon she had. Then she began reaching out. She called her sister, her cousins, her church friends. She told them what had happened, not in soft whispers, but in strong, clear words. My daughter was beaten in that school, and now she's lying in a coma. They want me to stay quiet, but I won't. I need your help. Her family and friends rallied around her, some cooking meals for her, others helping with errands. But most of all, they listened. And when they listened, they told others. Soon Naomi decided to take her story beyond her small circle. One evening, she sat in the hospital waiting room with her phone in her hand. She opened the camera and for the first time spoke to the world. Her voice trembled at first, but then it grew stronger. "My name is Naomi Williams," she said. I am the mother of Amara, the girl who was attacked in her school hallway. Right now, my daughter is fighting for her life in this hospital, and the school wants to call it an accident. But I am here to tell you it was not an accident. My child had begged for help and they ignored her. They ignored me, and now she's paying the price. I will not let them silence her. I will not let them bury the truth. She posted the video online thinking maybe a few people would see it, but by the next morning her phone was buzzing nonstop. The video had spread quickly, shared by friends of friends, then by strangers. Comments poured in, people expressing outrage, sending prayers, demanding accountability. Some were parents who had experienced the same thing. Some were students who admitted they had been bullied too. Naomi sat in the hospital cafeteria scrolling through the messages, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she did not feel alone. With growing support, Naomi's courage deepened. She began organizing. She met with parents whose children also felt unsafe at the school. She listened to their stories, some heartbreaking, some eerily similar to Amara's. Together, they decided to act. They printed flyers with Amara's picture, with bold letters that read, "Protect our children. Stop the silence." They shared them around the town, at grocery stores, churches, and community centers. Naomi also reached out to local news outlets. At first, a few reporters hesitated, not sure if the story was worth covering. But when she showed them the video of the attack, the same shaky footage that had haunted her, they agreed. Soon cameras were outside the hospital, and Naomi stood before them, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "I am not here just for my daughter," she told them. "I am here for every child who has been hurt, ignored, or silenced. If it can happen to Amara, it can happen to anyone. And I will not stop until this school is held accountable." The story spread even further. National outlets picked it up. Social media filled with hashtags carrying Amara's name. People Naomi had never met wrote letters, sent donations, and offered legal advice. A group of lawyers even volunteered to represent her for free, saying no family should fight this battle alone. Naomi, once an ordinary mother, now found herself at the center of a movement, but it was not easy. For every person who supported her, there were those who tried to tear her down. Anonymous messages appeared in her inbox telling her to drop it. People muttered in the grocery store that she was just looking for attention. Some of the bullies' parents accused her of exaggerating, of trying to ruin their children's futures. Naomi cried some nights, the weight of it almost too much to carry. But every time she walked into her daughter's hospital room, she remembered why she was fighting. One evening, after another long day of interviews and meetings, Naomi sat by Amara's bed and took her hand. "Baby, do you see what you've done?" she whispered. "Even while you're asleep, you've woken people up. You've made them speak when they used to stay quiet. You've started something bigger than both of us." The next week, Naomi organized a peaceful protest outside the school. Parents and students gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for Amara" and "No More Silence." Naomi stood at the front, her heart pounding, and spoke through a megaphone. "They told me to stay quiet. They told me this was just an accident. But we all know it was not. We know children are being hurt, and we know the system is failing them. Today we stand together to say enough is enough. No more silence. No more denial. We demand change." The protest drew even more attention. Reporters lined the street, cameras capturing the sight of a community standing behind one mother's voice. The school board, rattled by the growing pressure, finally issued a statement admitting failures in oversight and promising to review their policies. But Naomi was not satisfied with words. She wanted action. In meetings with district officials, she refused to back down. She brought evidence, witnesses, and the undeniable truth. She looked them in the eyes and said, "You failed my child. You failed these students. And if you think you can fix this with empty promises, you are wrong. We will not stop until real change is made." Naomi had never seen herself as a leader, but now she walked with the fire of someone who knew her fight was righteous. Strangers approached her on the street to thank her. Students began sharing their own experiences openly, some for the first time. The silence that had once smothered the halls of the school was cracking, replaced by voices that refused to be ignored. Through it all, Naomi carried both grief and hope. She longed for the day Amara would open her eyes and see what her suffering had sparked. She dreamed of telling her daughter, "You did not just survive. You changed everything." The mother who once believed she was powerless now understood her strength. She was not just standing for her daughter anymore. She was standing for every child, every family, every person who had ever been told to keep quiet. And as she looked out at the growing crowd of supporters, Naomi whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The morning of the second protest began with gray skies that threatened rain, but Naomi felt no fear of storms anymore. She had already walked through one. When she arrived at the school grounds, dozens of parents and students were already gathered, holding signs, chanting softly, waiting for her to speak. Some carried pictures of Amara, others carried handwritten posters with words like, "Safe schools now" and "No more bullies." Naomi stood at the front of the crowd with her hands trembling slightly, not from nerves but from the sheer weight of the moment. She looked at the large brick building that had once promised to protect her daughter, and felt her chest tighten. This was not just a school anymore. It had become the symbol of everything broken, everything hidden, everything denied. As reporters pointed their cameras toward her, Naomi raised the megaphone. Her voice carried with a strength that surprised even herself. "This is not only about my daughter. This is about every child who has walked through these doors in fear. This is about a system that ignored warnings, ignored cries for help, and turned a blind eye until blood was spilled. We are here to demand accountability. We are here to demand change." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing against the school walls. Students who once whispered about bullying now spoke openly. One girl stepped forward and told reporters that she too had been shoved in those hallways, and that no one listened when she complained. A boy confessed that he had been mocked for months and had considered dropping out. Their voices blended together, forming a chorus of truth that could no longer be silenced. Inside the school, administrators looked out from office windows nervously. They had never seen anything like this before. For years, problems had been covered up with careful language and private deals with parents. But Naomi had cracked open the silence and the truth was spilling everywhere. By the end of the week, the school board was forced to call a public meeting. Parents packed the auditorium, reporters lined the aisles, and students filled the back rows. Naomi sat in the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When her name was called, she walked to the microphone. Her legs were tired, her heart heavy, but her voice was unshakable. "My daughter is still lying in a hospital bed," she began. The room fell silent. "She has been unconscious for weeks because of what happened inside this building. And yet your first response was not compassion. It was denial. You called it an accident. You said you were handling it internally. But what you meant was you wanted it hidden. You wanted to protect your reputation while my child's life slipped away." A murmur spread through the crowd, but Naomi pressed on. "I am here to tell you no more. No more excuses, no more lies, no more silence. You will acknowledge what happened. You will change how this school treats its students. You will create real protection, real policies, real accountability. Because if you do not, we will not stop. We will continue to protest, to speak, to shout until our children are safe." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. "You may think I am just one woman. But look around. I am not alone. This entire community is awake now. We are not afraid of you anymore." The room broke into applause, cheers rising louder than the gavel that tried to restore order. Naomi returned to her seat, her chest rising with pride and exhaustion. She had said everything she came to say, and the crowd had carried her words like fire. The pressure mounted quickly after that night. News crews returned daily, demanding answers. The video of Amara's attack continued to circulate, drawing national attention. Social media flooded with messages of support from parents across the country who saw their own children in Amara's story. What began as one mother's fight had become a national conversation about bullying and accountability in schools. The district officials, once confident they could control the story, now found themselves cornered. They announced new safety protocols, the suspension of staff who ignored repeated complaints, and the immediate expulsion of the student most responsible for the attack. They promised mandatory training for teachers, counseling for victims, and a hotline for anonymous reports. But Naomi was not finished. She stood again at another press conference, her voice clear. "This is a start, but it is not enough. Promises on paper do not protect children in hallways. We will not stop until these promises are lived every day." The school shook, not literally, but in spirit. The weight of years of silence and denial was cracking apart, and Naomi's voice was the hammer. Students began forming support groups inside the school. Teachers, some embarrassed by their inaction, stood before classes and apologized. Parents filled board meetings with demands for transparency. Even those who had once been against Naomi began to change. One of the bullies' parents, who had fiercely defended their son, showed up at the hospital weeks later. They stood awkwardly at the door of Amara's room, holding flowers, their face pale with guilt. "I was wrong," the parent said quietly. "I cannot imagine the pain you are going through. I am sorry for defending him. I should have been here sooner." Naomi accepted the flowers but said nothing. She did not need their apology for herself. She wanted their apology for Amara. With each passing day, the movement grew. Naomi, once soft-spoken, had become the voice of hundreds. Her words shook not only the school but the entire town. What was once ignored was now unavoidable. And though she knew the fight was far from over, she also knew something had changed forever. Late one evening, Naomi sat again by her daughter's bed. She brushed Amara's hair gently and whispered, "Look at what you've done, baby. You've woken people up. You've made them see. You've made them act. This school will never be the same because of you." For a moment, Naomi thought she saw Amara's eyelids flutter. She froze, holding her breath, but it passed quickly. Still, she smiled. "I'll keep fighting until you wake up. And when you do, you'll see the world you changed." The storm Naomi had unleashed was still raging, but this time it was not a storm of pain. It was a storm of truth, of voices rising together, of a mother's love turning into a force no institution could silence. And the walls of the school, once unshakable, were trembling under its power. Weeks turned into months, and though the fight had drained Naomi of sleep and comfort, she refused to step back. Every time she walked into the hospital and saw her daughter lying still, she felt her resolve harden like stone. The school could no longer pretend this was an accident. The truth was out, and the weight of it was pressing down on everyone. The district, once arrogant in their denial, began to scramble. At first they tried small gestures, letters to parents, vague promises, and a few quiet suspensions. But Naomi had grown too strong to be silenced by scraps. She stood at every meeting, her voice unwavering, reminding them that real justice was not paperwork. Real justice was change that could be seen, touched, and felt in the lives of students. The bullies who had attacked Amara were finally brought before a disciplinary panel. Naomi sat in the front row, her face calm but her heart burning. She listened as lawyers tried to frame the attack as a misunderstanding, as if swinging a bat was something done without thought. But then witnesses came forward, students who had once been too scared to speak. One after another, they described the months of bullying, the repeated warnings ignored by teachers, and the day Amara collapsed in the hallway. Their words painted a picture too clear to deny. By the end of the hearing, the panel had no choice. The ringleader was expelled permanently. The others were suspended for long terms and ordered into counseling programs. The decision sent ripples through the school, a message that cruelty would no longer be excused. For the first time, Naomi felt a sliver of relief. It was not revenge she wanted. It was accountability, and finally she had seen a piece of it. But Naomi's mission stretched beyond her daughter's attackers. She wanted the system itself to change. She sat down with the superintendent and demanded comprehensive policies, stronger anti-bullying rules, mandatory training for staff, anonymous reporting systems, and mental health resources for students. She insisted that every complaint be documented, every cry for help taken seriously. At first, they resisted, speaking in circles about budgets and logistics. But Naomi kept showing up. She arrived with parents at her side, with community leaders, with reporters taking notes. Every time they tried to dismiss her, she reminded them of the hospital bed where her daughter still lay. She showed them the notebook she had filled with dates and details, a testament to how much had been ignored. She looked them in the eye and said, "This is not about money. This is about lives. How many more children need to end up in hospital beds before you act?" Her persistence broke through. The district voted unanimously to adopt sweeping reforms. They announced the creation of a new office dedicated to student safety, staffed with counselors and advocates. They introduced strict disciplinary measures for bullying, including mandatory investigations and swift consequences. Teachers received training sessions that taught them to recognize warning signs and to act immediately. Most powerful of all, the district agreed to name the new initiative after Amara. They called it Amara's Promise, a pledge that no student would ever be ignored again. Posters with her face and words of strength were placed throughout the schools. Every voice matters. Every child is protected. When Naomi walked down the hallway of the school for the first time since the attack, she paused by one of those posters. Tears filled her eyes as she saw her daughter's picture, smiling and alive, staring back at her. Students stopped and looked too, some bowing their heads in silence, others whispering about how everything had changed. Naomi touched the poster gently and whispered, "You did this, baby. Even while you slept, you made the world safer." The media called Naomi a hero. Journalists wrote articles about the ordinary mother who had shaken an entire school system. People across the country sent her letters thanking her for her courage. Some called her late at night. Parents who had once felt powerless but now felt inspired to stand up for their own children. Naomi always listened, always offered comfort, because she knew what it was like to feel alone in the fight. But beyond the headlines and reforms, Naomi's heart longed for one thing only, to see her daughter open her eyes again. Every victory felt incomplete without Amara there to share it. Every night Naomi returned to the hospital, sat by the bed and told her daughter about the progress. She read aloud the articles, showed her the posters, whispered the words of strangers who were praying for her. "You are the reason this is happening," she told her softly. "You are the reason children will be safe. You are the reason silence is breaking." And then one quiet evening it happened. Naomi was reading to Amara, her voice soft and steady when she felt the slightest movement under her hand. She froze, holding her breath. Slowly, Amara's eyelids fluttered just a fraction, but enough for Naomi to see the spark of life returning. Her tears fell instantly, her voice breaking. "Baby, it's Mama. I'm here. I've been here every day. You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe." Though the road to recovery was long, that small flicker was enough. Naomi saw it as a sign, not just of healing, but of hope. Justice had been served, change had been born, and now her daughter was beginning to return. The school was no longer the same place it had been. The walls that once held secrets now echoed with accountability. The halls where cruelty once thrived were filled with voices of support. Amara's story had carved a scar into the school, but also a promise that no child would ever walk those hallways alone again. Naomi stood taller than she ever had before. She had carried pain heavier than she thought possible, but she had transformed it into power. Justice was not a straight road and change was not instant, but she had proven that even the most ordinary voice, when fueled by love, could move mountains. As she left another district meeting one evening, reporters asked her if she felt satisfied with the changes. Naomi paused, her face calm but resolute. "Satisfied? No, this is not about satisfaction. This is about responsibility. Justice is not just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent. And as long as there are children in those classrooms, I will keep fighting, because no mother should ever sit where I sat, and no child should ever suffer the way my daughter did." The cameras flashed, capturing her words. But Naomi did not speak for cameras or crowds. She spoke for the girl in the hospital bed, the child who had been silenced but whose story had become a movement. Justice had begun. Change was real. And through it all, Naomi knew this was not the end of her fight. It was the legacy her daughter had already written, even before waking. The first time Amara's eyes opened fully, the room seemed to stop breathing. Naomi had been sitting by her daughter's bed as she had done every day for months, her head bent in prayer when she felt a sudden squeeze on her hand. She looked up quickly, her heart racing, and saw her daughter's lashes flutter, then part. For a long moment, Amara's gaze wandered, unfocused, like she was fighting through a fog. Then her eyes landed on her mother. Naomi gasped, tears rushing down her cheeks. "Baby, it's Mama. You're here with me." "I'm here." Amara's lips moved, the sound barely a whisper. "Mom?" Naomi leaned close, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, sweetheart. I've been waiting for this moment. You came back to me." She kissed her daughter's forehead, her tears soaking the pillow. Doctors and nurses rushed in, their faces lighting up. It was the miracle everyone had hoped for but dared not predict. After weeks of silence, Amara had awakened, fragile but alive. Naomi knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be therapy, pain, and slow steps toward recovery. But this was the moment she had prayed for. It was the proof that love and faith could pull a child back from the edge of darkness. News spread quickly. The community that had rallied behind Naomi celebrated with her. Strangers sent cards and flowers. Students gathered outside the hospital holding signs that read, Welcome back, Amara. Naomi stood at the window with her daughter, pointing out the crowd, whispering, "Look, baby, they're here for you. You changed their world." Amara's recovery was slow. Her body was weak and her speech came in fragments at first. But Naomi stayed beside her every step, cheering for every milestone. The first sip of water, the first step with help, the first time she smiled again. Each moment felt like a victory, a reminder that resilience was stronger than cruelty. When Amara was finally able to return home, Naomi decorated the house with balloons and flowers. Family and friends filled the living room, their voices ringing with laughter and relief. Amara sat quietly in her wheelchair, looking around at the faces, overwhelmed by the love that surrounded her. She whispered to her mother, "I didn't think people cared this much." Naomi knelt beside her, her eyes shining. "Baby, you don't even know how much you mean to them. While you slept, your name traveled everywhere. You became the reason people spoke up. You became a promise." The school district had already rolled out the new program, Amara's Promise. Naomi took her daughter to see the poster for the first time. They stood in the hallway together, and Amara stared at her own smiling face printed on the wall with the bold words, "Every voice matters. Every child is protected." Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "That's me." Naomi wrapped her arm around her. "Yes, that's you. And this is your legacy." The first time Amara returned to the school for a visit, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Students lined the hallways, their eyes wide, their expressions filled with awe and guilt. Some whispered her name. Others reached out to touch her hand gently. For many of them, she was no longer just a girl who had been bullied. She was a symbol of strength, someone who had endured the worst and still found her way back. One student stepped forward, a boy who had once recorded her humiliation on his phone. His voice shook as he spoke. "I'm sorry, Amara, I should have helped you. I didn't. But because of you, I promise I'll never stay silent again." Amara looked at him, her eyes soft despite the pain she had endured. "Then keep your promise," she whispered. "That's how you can help me." Her words spread quickly, repeated by students and parents alike. "Keep your promise" became the quiet motto of the community, a reminder that change required courage from everyone, not just one mother and her daughter. Months later, Naomi was invited to speak at a national education conference. Standing on a stage before hundreds of educators, she held her daughter's hand tightly as she told their story. "I am not a politician. I am not an expert. I am a mother, and I am here to tell you that no child should ever have to endure what mine did. We must listen when children speak. We must act when they cry for help. Silence is not safety. Silence is betrayal." The audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. Amara, standing beside her mother, leaned into the microphone and said softly, "I'm still here. And I'm not afraid anymore." Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter. This was the victory she had fought for. Not just policies, not just justice, but the return of her child's voice. At home, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Amara returned to her books, her dream of becoming a doctor still burning inside her. She studied harder than ever, determined to prove that no amount of cruelty could steal her future. Naomi continued to advocate, speaking at schools, community centers, and churches, reminding parents and children alike that they were not powerless. The legacy of their struggle reached far beyond their town. Other schools adopted programs modeled after Amara's Promise. Parents across the country shared their story as a warning and a beacon of hope. Naomi received letters from mothers in places she had never heard of, all saying the same thing: "Because of you, I will never be silent again." One evening, as the sun set outside their home, Naomi and Amara sat together on the porch. The air was warm, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. Amara rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom," she said quietly, "why did you fight so hard when it felt like the whole world was against you?" Naomi turned to her, her eyes soft but fierce. "Because you're my world, baby, and I would burn the earth to keep you safe. But I also knew it wasn't just about you. It was about every child who feels alone, every parent who feels powerless. I fought because someone had to, and I wasn't going to wait for someone else to be brave." Amara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I want to be like you." Naomi kissed her forehead. "You already are." The story of Amara and her mother did not end with a courtroom or a hospital bed. It continued in the voices of children who found the courage to speak, in the parents who refused to stay silent, in the schools that finally chose protection over pride. It lived in the quiet strength of a mother's love and the unbreakable spirit of a girl who survived. Their names became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be born. That even when cruelty tried to destroy, love could rebuild. That legacy was not about wealth or fame. It was about the lives you changed by refusing to surrender. As Naomi held her daughter close under the fading light of the evening, she whispered the words that had carried them through it all. They tried to silence you, but your voice is louder than ever. And together we will make sure the world never forgets.